This is Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed. And I did say at the end of the video I made for the first remake that if they did the sequel, then I would make a video on that too, so here we are with the sequel. Now, the original sequel is actually my personal favorite of the Destroy All Humans series. I think it has a nice middle ground between the atmosphere of the original game and the cool, shiny new toys that the future game would give you. So I think it just is in a perfect spot right in the middle, and that's why it's my personal favorite, which means I played this game the most. So I remember the feel that it had, I remember the atmosphere of each of the areas, and I was very much looking to see what they would do with it in the remake here. So what is Destroy All Humans if you've never actually played one of them before? They are open world sandbox games in the vein of, like, you know, your Grand Theft Autos and things like that, but of a specific style peculiar to the PS2 days, where the open world is actually a series of sort of mini open worlds separated by loading screens, each one having their own themes and stuff, and you run around as an alien and invade and complete various missions to, in this case, get revenge on the KGB, of all people, for destroying your mothership. And the first thing I really have to praise the game on is the first thing you've probably noticed, which is its visuals. Now, very often we see that remakes and remasters of older games, they get visually updated and they're very pretty, but they lose something in translation. Like, say, the Demon's Souls remake, which is beautiful, it looks great, but it also completely lost the atmosphere of the original Demon's Souls to the point that it feels like a completely different game. You also see this with things like Quake RTX and other stuff like that, where new lighting effects are added that do look nice, but they just completely change the atmosphere. And when you're remaking an entire game like this, especially a game with such a striking art style as the original sequel had, there's a lot to mess up. You know, if you're going to update it, you also have to keep the atmosphere of the original intact, and they've actually managed to do that, in my opinion, really, really well. In fact, I think this game should actually probably be the sort of golden standard for how to update a game graphically and make it look very pretty, while also keeping the original atmosphere intact. So yes, it looks very, very good, but it also still looks like Destroy All Humans 2. The thing about the original was that it had a crazy color palette, because the game takes place in the 60s and has a lot of drug references and things, so everything is very, very colorful, super saturated, highly exaggerated in every way. The original also had a lot of color, but the sequel, the original sequel, had even more than that because of its setting, and they've actually managed to keep that intact in this game as well. Every area has its own specific color palette, and that gives each area its own atmosphere, and they've managed, in my opinion, to keep all of those areas exactly how they should be. So the first area is based on Haight-Ashbury in the 60s, so obviously it's very psychedelic, very colorful, a lot of hippie motifs and rainbows everywhere and stuff like that, and they kept that, and I was actually really impressed with just walking through the streets in some areas of that first map, how colorful and saturated it was. It looks really good, and it kept the same atmosphere. The second area takes place in England, so it's very dreary, it rains all the time, there's lots of grays and earth tones and things, but it also has little peaks of very colorful, saturated, like, mod aesthetic at the ground level in certain places, and they kept that as well. It has the same atmosphere as it originally does. And just for one more, the third area is in Japan, so it's got this sort of Mystic Orient vibe to it that was very much sort of an exaggerated caricature of that sort of style of cinema and stuff in the original sequel, and that is intact here as well. So you have the very pretty, glowy purple and pink cherry blossoms and the bright red torii gates and stuff like that. It's all here, and it all feels right. So yeah, overall, I think that just going through each of the areas and feeling the atmospheres that are in each one, they've done a genuinely excellent, very commendable job of keeping them how they originally were, but just making them prettier. And that's the big thing that I was afraid of, because like I said, I've played this game a lot, I remember how each of these areas should feel, and I was afraid that we would lose some personality in exchange for high graphical fidelity, and I'm glad to say that we didn't, at least in my opinion. What about features-wise? What are some new things in the sequel? Well, for one, you have the skate module, which allows you to actually, like, anti-grav skate around the city, which is very fun, by the way. This was probably a response to some of the complaints of the original game that walking around was kind of slow and there were no vehicles. You only had your saucer, so you just had to walk everywhere. And in this game, they made the open world areas much larger than they were in the first game, so it would take even longer to get around. So in the sequel, they gave you the skate module, and that is intact here, and it's just as fun to use as it originally was, and it is also upgradable with things like extra bursts of speed, shockwaves, and the ability to bash through obstacles and things. Your psychokinesis also gets a bit of an upgrade in this game now. It's chargeable. The longer you hold something, eventually it will turn red and it will be launched with greater force. And you can also do the PK slam thing now, where you make the item hover above your head and turn white, and you can slam it down repeatedly, use it as like a weapon, like a melee weapon, effectively just controlled by your mind, and it makes the PK combat feel more more satisfying because you have more ways to actually do it. You're a lot more mobile in this game than you were in the original as well, not just because of the skate thing, but also because you have a dash that can be used in any direction to avoid attacks, which is very important because in this game you will have a lot more people going after you at once and a lot more projectiles in the air and stuff. I actually found that, at least originally, I felt that this game was harder than the first one, and I think they've actually maintained that difficulty. I think this is harder than the original remake as well, just because of the sheer number of enemies and projectiles that'll be coming after you, so the dash is very important. You also have an expanded jetpack that is easier to use and just can boost you up faster than it could before, and has a better, more controllable glide attached to it that helps you get around farther. And of course you can combine this with the skate and the dash to move around a lot more, so you are more mobile in this game. Your weapons have also gotten a bit of an upgrade from the original Zap-O-Matic, which can now chain to much more enemies, to the Disintegrator Ray, which is just more fun to use in general, partially because of your mobility, just making it more fun to sort of strafe around with it, but also because it gets more fun upgrades like multi-shots and the ability to have explosive ammo and things. Your Ion Detonator is much more powerful than it was in the original game with a huge area of effect, but you also get some shiny new toys like the Dislocator, which attaches bouncy discs to things. If I recall, they used to be balls. I thought now they're discs. I'm not sure why, but it works the same. It's just chargeable now. And your Meteor Strike gun, which is exactly what it sounds like. You can call down a big strike of meteors, which is super cool. And a couple of other shiny new toys that I won't spoil for you, but are very fun to use. Overall, this is a very creative arsenal in this game, and it makes the combat a lot more fun, in my opinion, than it was in the original. And the combat in the original was fine. It's just that the very colorful arsenal you have now, with a lot of creative weapons, with a lot of really fun upgrades you can get, makes the combat even more interesting. And your saucer gets a bit of an upgrade too, with just a slightly different control scheme, the ability to mass abduct people for upgrade purposes, and a new anti-grav weapon that allows you to cause some havoc by creating large floating areas where stuff just floats off into the sky and then slams back down later. New to the remake, by the way, is you have a bunch of skins for your saucer and for Crypto, and they're unlocked mostly by doing various missions with like really high scores, by actually, completing all the optional objectives and things in the missions. You'll unlock all sorts of skins for your saucer and for Crypto, which is really neat actually because they look good, and it's fun to be able to customize yourself with stuff that you can actually earn in-game. All of the voice acting has remained intact, and I think they've actually cleaned it up a little bit more than they did in the first remake because it sounds a lot more high quality. It kind of gets rid of that tinniness that you get with some older voice acting just being recorded on older equipment, and now it actually sounds quite modern and nice. You also have the classic return of the body snatch power from the sequel, which allows you to actually do exactly what it sounds like and be a movie alien and snatch people's bodies and run around as them, and it's pretty much required for a lot of the missions, and some of them you actually do have to be disguised as certain factions in order to get into certain areas or talk to certain NPCs and things, so you have to get used to using that, and you have some other useful powers that you can use to help the whole body snatching thing work better, like the power to make people forget what they were doing, so if they saw you, you can just make them forget instead of having to kill them, which would then alert you to everyone else in the vicinity, so it's a lot stealthier that way. And you also have the incredibly useful Mind Flash power, which is sort of like a mental flash grenade that just stuns everyone in the vicinity for a couple of seconds, makes them forget what they were doing, and makes them not able to see what you're doing. So you can actually use this to swap bodies in a big crowd if you need to, but the power is on a very long cooldown, so you can only use it every now and then. There are a couple of different upgrade systems in this game. There's one for your weapons and one for your psychokinesis powers. So the one for your weapons is based on getting these cores, these Furon cores. You can find them as collectibles out in the world. And of course this is from the era where stuff floated like a foot above the ground and rotated in place. So you do still have power-ups and things that look like that, which is a nice throwback. And you'll also get them in large numbers for completing the story missions and side missions, and the more optional objectives you complete, you get even more of them. And there are also some extra Furon tech bits that you can get that are used for the final tier of upgrades for any given weapon, and these are much more rare. But you can use these to upgrade all of your weapons across 2 different tracks, as well as some of your other equipment like your shield and your ability to skate and your jetpack and things like that. And the weapon upgrades are really fun in this game, and they did keep them really interesting. So they do drastically improve your weapons as time goes on, and they're very much worth getting because they give you all sorts of fun capabilities and make the combat even more colorful because of all the crazy stuff that you can eventually do once you have an upgraded arsenal. And then the PK upgrades are obtained through a new feature on your saucer called the Gene Blender, where each upgrade will require a certain number of a certain kind of people, and you simply have to fly around and abduct that many people. So you might need like 20 hippies, 10 cops, and 10 soldiers, so you have to go and find all of those, and once you get them all, you can blend them all together. Best not to think about how that works, and then get one stage of upgrade for each of your powers, and each power has 3 different stages of upgrade, and they're usually really significant, like from being able to body snatch people for a lot longer, to being able to psychokinesis stuff really, really hard, so that does a bunch more damage, so even basic stuff like cabbages can actually headshot people and kill them. But one thing I do like about these systems is that they are entirely optional. They're really, really fun, and the upgrades you get are absolutely worth it and really improve your combat capabilities a lot, but you don't have to do any of this. So if you don't want to use the upgrade systems and just want to go with just default equipment and stuff, you can totally do that. The mission structure of the game's main story missions has been kept pretty much intact from what I remember, and they are just as difficult as I remember them being. Some of them are actually a little bit tricky, and a lot of them also have optional objectives, which make them even more difficult, but are always worth doing for the extra upgrade points and just for the extra challenge, because they're fun. This is one other advantage that I feel that Destroy All Humans 2 had over the original game, and that's that I feel that the missions are more interesting and more varied. The missions in the first Destroy All Humans were still fun, but I feel that there are more varieties of things to do in the sequel, and it keeps you guessing and it makes you do a lot more interesting stuff, in my opinion. So that's one of the big reasons why I like the sequel more, was that I just feel the mission structure is more fun in general. So I'm glad they kept it intact, and the missions are just as I remember them pretty much. I'm sure there are some changes here and there. There might be some different objectives, and especially some of the optional objectives may have been shuffled around and changed a bit to just be different, but overall the structure is enjoyable, and I feel that the game feels like it originally did pretty much, so that all the story missions have the same vibe to them and are just as difficult as they were. In terms of bugs and stuff like that, I've had a couple of bugs, although luckily they have been entirely aesthetic. No bugs that have impeded my progress or stopped me from completing a mission or anything like that. The bugs have mostly been like, dead NPCs standing back up in place for a minute, even if I like popped their heads with the brain sucker power, which is a little bit weird. And a couple of times there was like a T-posing NPC in the background of one of the cutscenes, but these have been just very visual bugs that have only happened a couple of times, so that's good. I have had one crash though during one of the early missions on the first island, but I wasn't able to reproduce this crash. I tried to do the same things over and get it to happen again, but I couldn't, so I'm not entirely sure what caused it, but it was just after I stopped recording at one point. And when you do this, when you make videos, sometimes you have to understand that some games do not play well with recording software, or that your recording software can cause instabilities in the game that other average people would not actually get. So I feel like this is probably one of those crashes, considering I wasn't able to get it to happen again, that the average person is probably not going to have to deal with. So is Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed worth it? Well, in my opinion, yeah, but I am biased because I loved this game originally, and I feel that they've done a very good job of bringing it up to date while keeping its character and atmosphere completely intact, and I think that it is a very impressive thing to be able to do that when we see a lot of examples of developers not doing that. But you have to be in the mood for what it offers. This is not like a Grand Theft Auto 5 huge, gigantic experience. This is from a different time. It is a smaller game. It is not exactly short, but it's not super long either. The areas are fun, and they're a lot more detailed than the areas in the first game. They're larger, and there are a good number of them too. But it is still kind of like a compact experience, because it came from that PS2 era of open-world sandbox games where things were more compressed. So you have to like Destroy All Humans. This is definitely a remake for the fans, because I think the average person that's never played one of these games, they might be expecting something different than what they get, you know what I mean? It's a smaller experience. It is a very structured, kind of linear mission-based experience, rather than the larger open-world sandbox, like GTA Saints Row kind of experience that a more modern audience might be looking for. But if you loved the first remake, even if you've never played the sequel originally, this is definitely worth getting because it's more of that. This is the classic kind of old school definition of a sequel where it's not a major step in any direction, it's just more of the original, but with everything kind of enhanced, right? Like better combat, better missions, better variety, but it's still the same recognizable formula as the original. So whether or not this is for you is going to heavily depend on if this formula is actually something that you're personally interested in. I'll link you below in the description below this video to the Steam store page if you'd like to check it out yourself. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.